2.5 years ago, the Middle East had one storyline. Iran on one side and Israel and the United States on the other side, and everyone else was caught in between. That picture is gone, or maybe the map is changing. October 7, the wars that followed, and even the strikes on Iran at the end of February. All these events have buried that picture or buried that map in a way. The question now is, who is changing the map? Who is redrawing that map or that picture? I'm Joe Kawly, and welcome to the Diplomat. On this conversation, I'm joined by my colleague, Layla Bazzi, the editor-in-chief at MBN. And we are also so honored with our guest, Ambassador Tom Nides. He served as the former U.S. ambassador to Israel under President Biden. And today he is vice chairman at Blackstone, and one, I would say, of the very few voices heard in many different places, in Jerusalem, in Washington, and even in the Gulf. Mr. Ambassador, welcome to the Diplomat.
Thank you.
Before we get into the map or the picture that we tried to describe, I want to start with the man who is trying to read it. They say you are a person who could have a screaming match with Prime Minister Netanyahu over the phone, and then an hour later you would be able to grab some drinks with him. What does that tell us about how diplomacy is working?
Well, first of all, I'm honored to be here, and I appreciate the work that you all do and getting the message out, not only about America, around the Middle East. I think it's important for your viewers to hear people's different perspectives. So I'm honored that you guys are doing what you're doing. So thank you all very much. You know, one thing about Prime Minister Netanyahu, who has now been Prime Minister 6 times, he has been fixated for his almost 40 years in public service on the issue about Iran. You go into his personal office, and on the wall of his personal office is a map, not of Israel, but of Iran. And his view has been that Iran has been a threat to the state of Israel and to the region, has been proven out by the current situation. And so his fixation on that has been quite clear. He is a political animal. Obviously, he's won his prime minister multiple times. He knows more about American politics. He's worked with 7 American presidents. He understands our system probably better than we understand our system. Like any other person, he believes in his own beliefs, which we all know is sometimes good and sometimes a little bit more complicated. But we're in the middle of that being played out in real time.
You yourself this year said that Ben-Gvir, Smotrich, and in your own words, they are pushing this prime minister more to the far right or to the right. With these two still in the government today or in the cabinet, who is actually drawing the new map of the region? Washington, Jerusalem, or someone neither of them control?
Well, first of all, I've been very clear about my views about Ben-Gvir and Smotrich. When I was ambassador, I met with neither one of them. I felt they've played a very destructive role. I think Smotrich's role in pushing for the settlement expansion is, to me, terrible. It's terrible for Israel. It's certainly terrible for the Palestinian people. It's certainly terrible for the idea of having to ever have a 2-state solution. And I think the damage he has caused is quite something. And he will not get past the threshold. He will not be part of the next government because he's below the threshold in support. I mean, Ben-Gvir is just ridiculous, okay? Ben-Gvir is a thug. I never liked him. I don't think what he's doing is good for Israel. I'm about what's good for the Israeli people and for remember, Israel, as you guys know, 7 million or so are Jews, 2 million are Arabs. Ben-Gvir is not good necessarily, in my view, for a lot of Israelis, and certainly not good for the Arabs who are living in Israel.
How are these two impacting and changing the policy of Israel today?
Well, I think
we hear them saying that we want greater Israel. We hear them saying that we want to take control of Lebanon and occupy Lebanon because it's ours. How does that complicate the situation or maybe the peace with Lebanon?
Listen, I think it has complicated, which is why I hope elections will happen in October, which they will, and we'll have a new government. I mean, and if for no other, for the elites at a minimum, we will not have hopefully those 2 individuals and the parties in the government. and we'll have either Netanyahu could be a prime minister with some of the opposition joining him, which may or may not happen, but hopefully the coalition, the opposition, will be able to get to 61, and we'll have a new government with a new players in place. But yeah, of course, I mean, as you know, leadership matters, and there's no question that those individuals represent a far-right extreme, in my view, has pushed the prime minister to things that he may or may not have done on his own. But we also remember, the country was still recovering from October 7th. You also understand what's happened here with the Iran war. So a lot of things can be true at the same time. But the theme, my view, I'm looking forward to elections in October.
I'm happy that you mentioned that both Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, they were so radical in their speech. This leads me to a question that went viral when the current U.S. ambassador spoke about the biblical part, the Great Israel.
With Tucker Carlson.
You as an ambassador, you were before Huckabee. Did you ever hear in your private sessions when you were an ambassador there that there is a goal of a greater Israel? Is there any objective to that? Our audience would love to hear that from a former ambassador who was there during October 7th.
Or if they want to take the entire Middle East, let them.
Yeah.
Like that struck something.
Well, first of all, no one would dare to have that conversation with me when I was ambassador, and certainly I wouldn't support it. That kind of rhetoric. Everyone knew when I was ambassador that I very much focus on the idea of obviously care deeply about an independent Jewish state, and I also believe fundamentally that we should have a Palestinian state side by side with an Israeli state. We need a two-state solution. Joe Biden and Barack Obama, two presidents in which I served, were very clear about settlement expansion, how much we were opposed to it, things like E1. I fought day in, day out on the question around E1. These are really important parts. And people, the problem is most of your audience doesn't actually really understand exactly. They hear these things, but it's at the end of the day, it's fairly nefarious. It's pushing the expansion more and more to the West Bank and making it almost impossible to have a two-state solution, right? And so the issue of conversation around a greater Israel is not something, obviously, nor the people I represent. Listen, the American ambassadors, it's not my view. You're representing the President of the United States. It's not about Tom Nides or Michael Huckabee, or you're representing what the President of the United States is saying. And that's this is distinguishments, right?
But the word of an ambassador weighs heavy of an
Sure,
American
and that is
ambassador.
why when I was ambassador, I represented President Biden, and obviously I was Deputy Secretary of State under President Obama. The reality of this is you represent America, the American people, but you represent the president who has put you there. So again, I think ultimately the importance for the state of Israel long term is a two-state solution. We are nowhere near that right now, unfortunately, for all of us. But that's why spending a lot of time working on healthcare, education, of the hospitals in East Jerusalem, because I fundamentally believe if we're going to actually ever have long-term peace and prosperity, people need to have hope and opportunity, and that goes for both Jews and Palestinians. And the moment we lose that, we end up having the things we're having today.
How do you describe how Franklin Foer in his book described the relationship between the Biden administration, his book, The Last Politician? He described that Biden administration said, "Huck Bibi tight." Was that to give the Biden administration a leverage, or it was the other way around? And during the Democratic time, the deals happened with Iran during Obama time, and it wasn't to the liking of Netanyahu. So how do you describe the tension and the relationship
the one good thing is you all both know, there's a lot of things that can be true in foreign policy at the same time, right? What is true is Israel is an exceptionally important ally to the state of the United States. It is a democracy in a region that has no other democracies. It's important for our own national security. That is, I think, for sure, regardless if you love Israel or you don't like Israel, those facts are true. Joe Biden, who was a long-time political figure in Washington, not only the president, but the vice president, the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, had a long relationship, complicated relationship with Bibi Netanyahu, which is usually the theme of most politicians. He cared deeply. Joe Biden and Barack Obama and Donald Trump cared deeply about the security of the state of Israel and about the need for a homeland for the Jewish people. Both Barack Obama and Joe Biden also pushed Bibi a lot on this issue of a two-state solution, about the importance of a homeland for the Palestinian people, as well as stopping the settlement growth that was happening in the West Bank, which I was in the middle of. So the problem with Netanyahu, with many, and like many politicians, there's some things we liked about Bibi, there's some things we disagreed with Bibi, and there's no question that the prime minister of the today, because of his coalition of these guys, Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, these right-wing folks, have pushed the prime minister way to the right, in my personal view, which has caused all sorts of consternation, not only with the Biden administration and obviously the Obama administration in early years, but certainly with the Trump administration as well.
Israel is the only Middle East, the only democracy in the Middle East. Many would say that there is Lebanon. I mean, it's a functioning democracy. They have a parliament, they have a Christian president. So it's a functioning. Why would people in the mainstream media in the West always repeat that? You think?
Well, I think you have to step back. Listen, again, as a former American ambassador, what happened when I was ambassador, we had, as you know, the judicial reform debate in Israel, in which case the Netanyahu government was trying to change the rules around the Supreme Court. And every day, on every Saturday, 400,000 Israelis hit the streets, in Tel Aviv. 400,000, which would be equivalent of 8 or 9 million Americans, okay? They hit the streets in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem and protested all over the country. No one got arrested. No one got hurt.
No violence.
No violence. And so you have to ask yourself a question. That probably cannot happen in probably any other country in the Middle East. I'm not saying good or bad. Listen, you know, I'm very close to the Emiratis and the Saudis and the Kuwaitis and the Qataris, and I have a enormous respect for them. But that's not the systems they have in place for a lot of reasons. But that's why I say that the Israeli, as complicated and as frustrating and maddening for guys like me about this current government is, it is a democracy. It is a democracy where people go to the polls. In fact, as you know, the prime minister had multiple elections before he was able to be prime minister. So I refer to it as a democracy, not a perfect democracy. Make no mistake. You got to be careful how I articulate it, but a democracy nonetheless, and that's what is important.
I was going to ask about the alliance of Bennett and Lapid. You mentioned that now. Do you think their alliance would really lead and overthrow Bibi?
Okay, you got to be careful about the word overthrow, because it's not overthrow. They're going to have elections in October.
Okay.
So I'm sure your viewers understand. You got to get 61 votes to become prime minister, or the party become prime minister. I think on today's facts, you have the opposition, which are Naftali Bennett and Yair Lapid and Gadi Eisenkot and Lieberman. The opposition, which would be compared to the current government. Neither one of those two right now today probably can get to 61. So both the opposition and the current government today, now that long things could happen and maybe it's 1 or 2 seats, but that's how on today's facts. So right now, unclear about the outcome of an election today. Then you asked me about the Arab parties. I have an enormous respect for Mansour Abbas. When I was in Israel a few weeks ago, I had a long meeting with him. He's one of my heroes. I think he's done a spectacular job. And I went to see Tibi as well. I've seen much of the Arab leaders. But in the current environment, and not what I would like to see happen, but the current environment, it's going to be very difficult for the Arab parties to join the opposition for a variety of reasons, post October 7th, the current situation. But they will play an important role in a government if once it actually gets formed, how it all works. But make no mistake, how great would it be? How great would it be that the Arab parties that are 10 or 14 seats join a part of the new government? And that's good for the Arab people, it's good for Israel, it's good for the Palestinian people, but we're not there right now. But at the end of the day, my hope would be that the Arab parties would be part of an overall coalition government, but I think it's probably a little bit dreamy on today's facts, but we'll see how it all plays out.
To shift the conversation right now about the peace and what happened in Washington for the first time in probably more than 30 years or 30 years between Lebanon and Israel. The two ambassadors met. President Hoon, the Lebanese president, stood up on April 17, and he said that Lebanon is no longer an arena for anyone's wars. But Lebanese people heard that for like different versions of that sentence for 30 years. Is this the first real sovereignty that Lebanon today is talking about when Iran is weakened, Hezbollah is weakened, or a rhetoric ahead of a real disarmament for Hezbollah?
Out of your mouth to God's ears. I mean, listen, how great would it be, right, that we'd actually have, for the Lebanese people. At the end of the day, let's stop talking about the politicians. Let's talk about the people who actually are impacted by this, okay? Look in Gaza, okay? Most Gazans do not wake up in the morning and say, let's go kill a bunch of Jews, okay? Most Gazans want everything else. They want an opportunity, they want a house, they want to live a peaceful life. Look what goes on in Lebanon, okay? The Lebanese people are tired of this. The Lebanese people who are living in the southern part of Lebanon, even those who are living in Beirut, they're tired of this. I mean, look what's going on even in Israel for the Israeli people. They're tired of it. And the reality happens is these politicians who decide what's good or bad for their people is what's the problem. So the answer to the question is, my hope is that the Lebanese government can have enough power and control over Hezbollah to force Hezbollah to disarm. Do I think it's going to happen tomorrow? No. These are gradual processes. It takes time. And listen, look what's going on in Gaza. I mean, still half of Gaza is still controlled by Hamas. Okay, think about that for a minute. Okay, this takes a lot of time, a lot of people to sense there's an opportunity. It's safe to be able to do these things. So again, I think it's the Middle East, guys. It's a big souk. A lot of people you don't know what side people are on.
Yes.
Big market, right?
Big market.
And I think we got to understand that for the long term.
Talking about this big market and the Middle East, and there might be a peace deal. Let's say, what if the next day happened between Lebanon and Israel? This would be huge because it will have a break in the grip of Iran on its proxies. That's first. But at the same time, you have the role of Saudi Arabia. This is where it takes us to the Abraham Accord, which you vouch for and you believe in it. You said that Saudi Arabia was so close in having the Abraham Accord sealed, but now it's far away. But it took from the U.S. the weapon deals that it wants, all the investment that they need. And at the same time, they are warning Al-Sharia in Syria to make some kind of security deal with Israel. And there are some talks inside Lebanon with Saudi Arabia, hold your horses, do not go and meet Netanyahu. So do you think that Saudi Arabia outmaneuvered the U.S.?
No. I mean, I think...
But how do you explain this?
Let's step back for a second, okay? Because I think it's important to put this in context for your viewers, okay? So under the Biden administration, there's no question that that MBS desired to have a security agreement with the United States. Widely discussed about the idea that the Saudis wanted to have a treaty between the United States to basically protect them, a sort of like a NATO Article 5 without Article 5, right? Mm-hmm. And one of the reasons why he believed to do that is the importance of the U.S.-Saudi relationship. And that was moving along. And part of that idea was also that at the same time, Saudi would normalize with Israel. So those conversations were happening in real time. Secretary Blinken was flying to Riyadh, and Jake Sullivan was flying to Riyadh, and there was lots of conversation. And it got quite close, because I think the desire was that we could get the votes in the U.S. Senate to make it a formal treaty. We were very close. October 7th happens. All bets are off at this point, right? I mean, Israel faces the worst catastrophe in their country, a number of Jews killed on a single day since the Holocaust. So obviously all of that changes. The plates of what side you on starts changing and maneuvering. And some would suggest, I'm not sure, I believe that one of Hamas's goals of October 7th was to slow down or stop the Abraham Accords, or the expansion of the Abraham Accords. I'm not sure I totally agree with that, but nonetheless, it had the effect of that happening. Okay, so fast forward. Do I think, given now what the Iranians have done, you know, your enemy of your enemy is your friend, right? Mm-hmm. And do I think that the Iranians have put the Saudis, the Emiratis, the Qataris, the Kuwaitis, the Bahrainians in a very, very difficult place? Yeah, I do. And I think they're going to be looking inside themselves about their own security, how their security needs to be improved, and what their alliances look like. And so ultimately, at the end of the day, do I think the Saudis will end up trying to get closer to Israel or to the Americans? That is unclear. For sure, in all of this, the Abraham Accords have been the bedrock of that. The Emirates, as you can see, have become closer to the United States and Israel, the Bahrainians, the Moroccans.
Morocco.
So do I think at the end of the day, the Saudis will end up deciding that that's the path? My hope would be that to be the case. But again, like everything else, it's going to take a little time. More time.
You mentioned earlier that the most important thing right now are the people who are being affected, not the politicians. Do you think Trump is aware of what the people of the Middle East are going through? Even the former Secretary of State and many other U.S. officials said that Netanyahu tried with many different presidents to have this war, and now he have this war. He's doing it. The Lebanese people are being displaced. Many Gazans are still being displaced. What is the solution from the politicians? Because by the end of the day, policy that is going to affect people is done by these politicians. How are the policies going to protect the people of the Middle East?
It's a great question. I think, first of all, let's answer the question two ways. One is to answer this idea that the prime minister in some way, quote, convinced Donald Trump to attack Iran is sort of silly, okay?
So Anthony Blinken is silly?
No, again, I think the reason it's silly is you can't have it both ways. President Trump has been very clear to everyone. He is the single decider in chief, okay? He alone is the one who makes the decisions. He alone is the person who communicates on a daily basis through all sorts of mechanisms, including Truth Social. So you can't be in a situation where, in my view, that yes, do I think that Bibi Netanyahu's tried to convince, you know, Joe Biden and Barack Obama and Donald Trump in this first term to do these things? Sure. But if I was him, I'd do the same thing. I don't necessarily agree, but if I'm him and I believe fundamentally that Iran is the difference between life and death of the Israeli people, I'm going to try to convince the American president to do those things. Now, President Trump had to make the decision. He's the one who has to make the decision. So the idea that somehow he got convinced or sandbagged by Bibi Netanyahu that is silly. Okay, did Bibi try? Sure. So that's number one. At the end of the day, which is unfortunate, is that these countries do answer to the people on the ground. Okay, and you know, I think in some respects, you know, what's sad about what's happening in Iran, I do think the Iranian people, remember 90 million people live in Iran. Mm-hmm. I think they were very close to pushing back on the regime. Okay, I think there was a real groundswell of I was with one of our employees who happens to be Iranian, and I was having this conversation, and I could tell from them that how close some thought that this could be a possibility. The reality of this is that until it happens from the ground up, that's the only way that ultimately these regimes change, okay? And the leadership adds that. It's not top down, which we've learned about changing the regime in Iran. It cannot happen from the top down. It has to happen from the bottom up.
Especially a military regime. They have nothing to lose.
But even in Lebanon, I mean, even in Lebanon, the people pushing back on Hezbollah in the south, that's all about pushing back, okay? And when you look around the world, you know, at the end of the day, regimes, you know, reflect what the people will do. Yes, it's very hard. We have a military regime and cracking down, but that would be my hope.
They are pushing back on Hezbollah in Lebanon.
In Lebanon, yeah.
And they are pushing back on Israel because the statements, but also the actions on the ground. The bombing of like homes or churches or sacrilegious places, this is also making people push and taking people who are not even in the Hezbollah arena or circle. Is that, so are you giving us a reason to not move forward with the peace? How do you see that?
Well, but I think it's important to understand. Listen, I think it is the people of these countries need to figure out what they're willing to tolerate and what they're not willing to tolerate, both in Lebanon and Iran, and we see what happened in Gaza and in Israel as well.
Yes.
Okay? In Israel, we have elections. It'll be up to the Israeli people to decide what direction they want their country to go into, and that's what go back to what the democracy is. Okay, and I think in Lebanon, people will have to decide: are they living better with Hezbollah and the power Hezbollah is imposing upon people in the south? Are they sick of this? Are they tired of moving from house to house and not being with their families? They have to make those decisions for themselves, and that will then ultimately push back. Not easy to do, by the way. Not easy to do.
Because they are part of the community, part of the people.
Totally. It has to be part of the grassroots. It has to come from the bottom up. And I think that's what you're seeing around the Middle East.
The war started on Iran, the 12 days, and now in late February. Back then, before that, we used to have some kind of a monitoring on the nuclear enrichment in Iran. After the 12 days hit, we have no longer any monitoring of what's going on inside. And most of the specialists said that Iran was a few weeks away of doing a bomb. Did we just press pause on this nuclear enrichment? What did this war do?
I think it's important, again, for your viewers, without boring them and having to turn off their internet access. But so just to remember, so when Barack Obama and Secretary Kerry and my friend Wendy Sherman negotiated the JCPOA, there was the agreement that basically dealt with the enrichment issues with Iran.
But for a period of time, there was a sunset
again,
line.
so let me just finish. Okay. It's by no measure was it a perfect agreement.
No.
By no measure. I don't even think that people who negotiated thought it was a perfect, but it eliminated and eliminated for a period of time their ability to enrich to weapons grade to build a bomb. Okay? More complicated than that, but took weeks and weeks to negotiate. It was an agreement, and part of the agreement, to your point, had a timeline, a sunset in 2030, which at point the agreement then is over, and our hope was that we'd be able to build on top of that agreement for the next president. Donald Trump becomes president of the United States. He decides, it's a justification, he can do whatever he wants to. He rips up the agreement. Okay? That's what happened in the election at that point. When he ripped up the agreement, from that period of time to today, the Iranians have only gotten closer and closer to a nuclear weapon. Okay? Now, I'm not arguing about was the JCPOA a good agreement or a bad agreement. I'm a very practical guy. Okay? No question, no one in the Middle East wants Iran to have a nuclear weapon. No one in the Middle East wants Iran to have a bunch of ballistic missiles. No one wants that, okay? It's proven by what has just happened here in the last 2 months. So we're at where we're at. And there's a lot of, we like to refer to Monday morning quarterbacking. Yep. You know, the football games happen on Sunday, and Monday, every one of us are geniuses about what they should have done, okay? For sure, we are in a much worse place today as it relates to Iran's nuclear desires and ambitions than we were, 10 years ago. However, just to be clear, to give the Trump administration a modicum of credit, some credit, they have done a good job of diminishing, not eliminating, the ballistic missiles, obliterating for the second time, I don't know sure what that's called, their nuclear capacity, okay? That they have done a good job of that. And if you're living in one of these Arab countries where many of your viewers are, you saw what Iran's behavior was. I mean, if you're in I read a piece today that like 2,600 rockets were shot into the UAE over this last period of time. And that's also in Bahrain and Morocco and Kuwait and Qatar. So they're sitting around saying, okay, Iran, is dangerous. But your question around their nuclear capacity, I think if I had to predict today, again, I mean, it's hard to do this. You do this on a TV show. It could be different tomorrow. I think ultimately there will be another deal at some point, and it will look very similar he won't say this, very similar to the deal that Barack Obama did, 12 years ago with the JCPOA. It won't be called that. It'll be called some other Trump agreement, the best agreement ever. But that's how, because at the end of the day, you're going to have an agreement. You're going to have an agreement of some sort.
Before the close, we have to talk about Gaza and what's happening from your lens, especially at Blackstone lens. Before we finish this interview, we could talk for hours, but we don't have the time. You don't have the time.
You don't have the time.
To bring also the people in the equation. You said earlier this year that those of us who care about Israel have to recognize we made mistakes. Today, the World Bank puts Gaza reconstruction at $71 billion. The Board of Peace has, as of now, 17 billion in pledges. Through this, or your Blackstone lens, is part of the mistake, the assumption that someone else will pay for what Israel did or what Israel will not let function?
Okay, well, let's unpack this, okay? Because it's not as simple as you articulate. First of all, as you know, as someone who, what happened on October 7th should never have happened to anyone, okay? And I said I thought some of the reasons for it, but the amount of death and destruction that happened,
yes.
I don't think any of us would say, in my view, and to be clear, Hamas knew exactly what they were doing. Mm-hmm. Hamas knew if they did this to Israel, Israel's reaction would be, 5 times, 10 times more aggressive, because it's like the kid on the playground. Mm-hmm. A little kid that punches the big bully. What do you think the bully's going to do? Okay, I'm not
suggesting Israel a bully.
No. But I'm saying to you, you do this,
yes.
right? You do this, and you understand. Okay. And by the way, they took hundreds of Israelis, grandpas and grandmothers and little kids and little infants, and put them in tunnels in Hamas. So that number one. Number two, as you know, as I know, and as your viewers know, the Hamas didn't care about how many innocent Gazans died because it was about martyrism. It's about the cause.
That's the ideology.
Okay, it's about the cause, and so that's really sad. It's sick, actually, really sad. And then to be honest, I believe Israel could have done a much better job on the humanitarian issues in Gaza. Okay, because never should you use food and water against innocent people.
Okay? As a weapon, yeah.
And some would argue it wasn't true, that people weren't starving in Gaza. People could debate that, but my view, this is the perception, and I think probably in my view, the reality, Israel should have done a much better job, okay, on all of that. Now we get to this question around rebuilding. Rebuilding Gaza is going to be really up to the governments of the region to rebuild, okay? Because ultimately, the importance of stability in the region is going to affect the Egyptians, the Saudis, the Qataris, the Kuwaitians, the Lebanese, and so they collectively are going to be the need to be able to help build and rebuild Gaza for their own security. Okay? And Israel itself, for its own security, for their own well-being. Yes, without question, that the people of Gaza deserve this. They deserve clean water and a house and schools and hospitals, without question. But it's going to be the importance of the Americans with some of our money, but there needs to be regional buy-in to actually do this if it's going to be sustained and at the end of the day change the direction for the Gazan people in a way that I think most of us would like to see it happen.
In February, you said, because to tie the entire picture, how it's being redesigned, you said in your own words, an inch away from getting Saudi normalization done. 3 years later, MBS has the F-35s, the nuclear cooperation, and the United States security understanding, without conceding a single diplomatic inch on Israel. Was the deal really to react in 2023, or has it always been a story Washington tells itself?
Well, it's interesting. I think if MBS was sitting here today on the couch, I think he would have said, "Listen, this agreement that he struck with the Trump administration is agreement with the Trump administration. It's not a treaty, okay?" And I think what he wanted is a lasting, because as you probably know, the Trump administration will not last forever. And we also will have it's in our best interest, national security interest, to protect the Saudis for a whole variety of reasons. But at the end of the day, I think what the leadership in Saudi Arabia were trying to achieve, is a long-term like treaty, which would mean going in and vote in the United States Senate, not just have a handshake and the word of the president, which is totally legitimate. Don't misunderstand me. But I think over the long haul, I think that the normalization that took place with the Emiratis and the Bahrainians and Morocco have stood withstood time. And I think if we can get ourselves to a situation with the sides, I think it will only benefit the region.
Before you leave us, we want to reflect a little bit. We have a couple of questions about your time in Israel. What was the most difficult or hardest time for you as an ambassador, and nobody knows about it? The public doesn't know about it.
You know, I made a decision that I would go visit the families who's got killed by a terrorist attack, any terrorist attack. Okay, so not just Israelis, but Arabs and Druze, and I would go visit the family as the American ambassador. I started that, which unfortunately probably wasn't. I shouldn't have started it, because once you started it, you couldn't really stop it, and it's really hard. I don't speak Hebrew. I don't obviously speak Arabic, but to sit in a family and hold the hands of a mother and father who have just lost their father, mother, sister, brother is beyond anyone's comprehension. So I think was the single biggest difficulty for me. The second thing I think was, and for me, is I worked so hard. I would do nothing that would harm the security of the state of Israel. But I also believe that working with the Palestinians in the West Bank was exceptionally important to getting a long-term peace in the Middle East. And what people didn't know, I was doing a lot of things behind the scenes to try to improve that. You know, as I think I mentioned earlier, I spent a lot of time when President Biden came for his 10th visit to Israel. I insisted that he go to East Jerusalem to go to Makassa Hospital. And I got a lot of pushback from the Israelis about this. And he not only went there, but I announced a several $100 million grant from not only USAID, but all the Arab countries to help support the East Jerusalem hospitals. 80% of the people who are at the East Jerusalem hospitals are Palestinians, both in East Jerusalem and coming over the border. So I spent a lot of time on this. And I think, that people didn't know that, because I was the American ambassador to Israel. I wasn't the American ambassador to the Palestinian people. But I thought that would help Israel. I thought it would help make Israel a more secure, democratic country. And so, that's the things that were the most fulfilling to me, and also the most frustrating, because it is not easy, okay? It's not easy, not only not easy from the Israeli perspective, but also the Palestinian issue as well.
Last question, if you could rewrite one policy decision back in your time in office that would help the Arab people have a play in the decision-making of this new map of the region, what would that be?
Well, I think a couple things. First of all, I think we both Democrats and Republicans need to be more aggressive on settlement expansion, because I think it harms the psychology of the Palestinian people as you go into roadblocks and you go walk around and you drive around the West Bank, which I've done. So I think that, to me, is something that we as Americans could have done a better job on, and continue the case today. And I'm watching that expansion happen every day. I think the Palestinians would benefit from new leadership as well in the Palestinian Authority. I think at some point, new leadership would probably not be the worst thing in the world. That could benefit both the perception of what's going on in the West Bank, and I think that's number two. And number three, I think if I knew now what was potentially happening in Gaza with Hamas, obviously, I would have tried to do everything I could to stop October 7th, because, October 7th should never have happened. Should never happen. I mean, it was a complete security failure on the Israeli side. It was a horrendous act by the Hamas. And if I could wave my magic wand and I could have known that this was a potential, listen, we had, we had USAID people in Gaza, so it's not as like this wasn't some unbelievable, sophisticated attack. I mean, I would have hoped that we would have been smart enough to avoid the October 7th.
Ambassador, thank you for your time and your candor. That was Ambassador Tom Nides talking about the new map in the region, and the wars will be over soon, but what replaces them is being right now discussed in capitals like Washington to Ankara to Riyadh. So we will be watching, and thank you for being with us. This was The Diplomat.